Nau mai, haere mai, kia ora, and welcome to Shine Today. Nā mihi nui ki a koe ko Andrew Urquhart tēnei. My guest today you may be familiar with, well some of you, especially if you watch Church at Home on Sunday mornings. He was nominated as the Catholic Bishop of Auckland in December 2021. The diocese welcomed him in February 2022 with a beautiful pulphery. It's my pleasure to welcome Bishop Steve Lowe to Shine TV. Bishop, kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Andrew, and tēnā koutou katoa to everyone who's watching.
Firstly, the move from Waikato to Auckland, just another friendly Aucklander. So is that problematic in terms of which rugby team you cheer for now?
Oh no, I've always stayed with the same team.
Yep.
I'm a staunch Highlanders fan.
Oh, well, very glad to hear it as a Dunedin boy myself. A bit of a big move though, I suppose, as Bishop of Waikato for a period of time.
Yeah.
Coming up to the big smoke, as it were?
Yeah, I've been Bishop of Hamilton Diocese, so that's the Waikato,
Yes.
Bay of Plenty and East Coast, for 7 years, and I just get a phone call to tell me that Pope Francis had appointed me Bishop of Auckland.
Yep.
And so suddenly everything changes.
Do you get a say in that, or is that, well, no, this is what the Pope said?
No, we're asked.
Okay.
We're asked if we would do it, but the decision has already been made in many ways.
Yeah, well, we're very glad that you responded to that. Now, take us back to the beginning. Grew up in the South Island, I understand, near Hokitika, is that correct?
Yeah, I was born in Hokitika, born and bred, and did all my schooling there, and that's where I was baptised. I was part of St Mary's Parish in Hokitika. I did 1 year at Canterbury University after school and became a university dropout, and then returned to Hokitika working for New Zealand Forest Service. And I stayed with the Forest Service and later the Forestry Corporation for 8 years, but first in Hokitika, then Christchurch and then Timaru. And that's where the whole call experience to priesthood started to happen.
I was going to say from a lumberjack to a bishop. That's quite a story, really. What was the initial sense of calling in that regard?
So I had no desire whatsoever to be a priest, and but when I moved to Timaru, I really got involved in the parish there. I'd always been involved in the parishes, but it was there that I really claimed my faith as my own. And just one night I was at Mass, and in the middle of the priest's homily, I believe I saw Jesus coming on the cloud of heavens. Wow. I knew priesthood was totally right for me. I'm a bit of a sloucher normally. I'm not doing it here, but I just sat bolt upright in my seat, and people looked at me as if to say, "What's wrong with you? The sermon's not that good." But I talked to some friends in our young adults group about it, and they said, "Oh, that's it, you're marked." And I said, "Oh, I don't know about that." I says, I don't think I'm the right kind of guy to be a priest, and I don't want to be a priest, so I just ignored it. And then everything started to go wrong in my life, and the only thing that was really working was prayer. And one night I prayed, "Well, if it's a priest you want me to be, give me a sign." So much for you should not put the Lord your God to the test. And the next day when I got home, the phone was ringing, and it was the young priest from the parish and saying, "Oh, I've been trying to get hold of you for days. I'm coming around for a coffee, don't move." And he sat down, he said, "Have you ever thought of being a priest? I think God might be calling you to be a priest." And I mean, that's what really set it off. There was obviously some discernment after that, but it just wouldn't go out of my mind.
It's, I suppose, the Timaru equivalent of a letter from the Pope, really, isn't it?
Well, yeah, or I suppose it's my Damascus experience or something like that. Yeah. So.
Do you remember, I suppose, the process from there? Do you remember the day that you were ordained as a priest?
Yeah, so for a Catholic priest, we do about 6 to 7 years training. So most of mine was at the seminary, which was then in Mosgiel, just out of Dunedin, and then pastoral practicum in a parish in Christchurch. I did my last year of seminary in Philadelphia in the United States, and then came back, finished my pastoral year, and I was ordained in Hokitika on the 7th of June, 1997.
Well, very special.
1996.
1996,
Yeah.
okay. Very special to be coming back home in that regard. The place where you found faith was the place you were ordained.
Yeah, it was. And that was reflected in the community that gathered. It wasn't just the Catholic community, it was lots of other people too. And it was a real event in the town. Everybody sort of knew about it. And But yeah, and it was equally significant for me because my father had died the year before.
Okay.
I had hoped at my first Mass to renew their wedding vows for their 50th wedding anniversary, but it wasn't to be. So it was a significant weekend.
Bittersweet in some ways in that regard.
Yeah.
So from there, being ordained as a priest, any thought, any vision that perhaps one day you would be wearing a bishop's hat, as it were?
No, I didn't want to be a bishop either. But no, it's just for a priest, and I'm a diocesan priest, which means we're associated with a diocese. So for me, that was my first appointment was in Christchurch, then Ashburton for a year, 2 years in Greymouth, and then Timaru as parish priest. And I just loved parish work. I just love journeying with people and their journey with God, and just marvelling at how God works in people's lives, but also seeing how God's changing me and my journey of faith as well. While I was in Timaru, I was asked if I would go away and study in Rome and come back and work on the staff of the seminary training future priests. So that happened. I had 2 years in Rome, and then in 2008 I started at Holy Cross Seminary, which is now in Auckland, and I had 7 years on the staff there, working with those guys who are discerning priesthood and journeying towards that.
Again, being able to see yourself in that process.
Absolutely.
Just wanting to talk about the parish system, if you like, because you certainly got to travel around and be involved in a lot of parishes in New Zealand. Is that difficult as a parish priest to not be able to put down roots too far, that you're always just passing through, as it were?
Yeah, I think for us as priests, and we don't marry and we haven't got the family, but availability is the big thing, and it's really hard when we have to leave. It's like you're going through a separation, but you soon get into the life of the new parish, and you develop new relationships and get into the life of that parish. And so every parish has been a gift to me, and as I continue to learn what it is to be a priest.
Have you felt a separate sense of calling in all of the stages in what God has called you to do, from the different parishes to the different roles within the church?
That's a really good question. One of the saints of the churches was a young woman, Therese of Lisieux, and she said there's always a vocation within a vocation, and so she was called to be a Carmelite nun, but she felt her particular vocation was to be love in the midst of the church. I think for me, as a priest and living out my baptismal call, it's to be a shepherd after the heart of Jesus, and so that hasn't changed all along the way, but it's grown deeper, and I've appreciated it more and more.
And perhaps got a larger flock than you started off with.
Absolutely, and one of the things as a bishop we're asked to have a motto, and mine is, "The Lord is my shepherd."
Oh, very nice indeed. So since 2021, stepping into very big shoes with Bishop Pat Dunn, having to step down for health reasons. You would have known Pat well. Was that difficult? Was that intimidating at all?
Yeah, it is intimidating, as it was following Bishop Dennis Brown in Hamilton. I mean, they're both great men of faith, and greatly loved shepherds in both dioceses. So yes, there's always that. But I remember when I went to Timaru, the parish council chairperson, Nikki, stood up and she said to the people and to me, we've been really blessed by the priests that we've had. They've all brought their own gifts and talents, and we're really looking forward to seeing what you're going to bring. And I think there was something really freeing about that, and that's always stayed with me. And in the end, it's not so much me; it's about what the Lord does through me.
No, very good indeed. Now, the Church, the Catholic Church in particular, one of the oldest institutions on the planet. Having said that though, there has been change within the Catholic Church. Certainly the world has changed in recent times. Talk to us about, I suppose, some of the aspects of change within the Catholic Church from your point of view.
Yeah. As you say, changing world. And in my lifetime, it's just changed immensely.
Yeah.
I just think of the technology, I just think of the social climate of New Zealand, I just think of the demographics of New Zealand. You know, we live in a rapidly changing world, and yet in the midst of it, the church has to engage with that world and journey with it. And so the church is always always changing. I suppose going back 500 years in church history, when the Catholics and the Reformers went their separate ways, we each took something of the tradition with us and developed that and grew in that. But not a lot of love exercised between us. But I grew up in an environment in my hometown where we had really good relationships with our neighbours who were of the different churches in Hokitika. When I was working for Forest Service in Hokitika, some of the staff there, we were in an ecumenical prayer group. So I mean, those were big changes. The big change for the Catholic Church was the Second Vatican Council of the 1960s, and Mass was celebrated in Latin. It went to English. That was a massive change for people. But the final document of the Second Vatican Council was the Church in the Modern World. And I think that's really shaped the vision of the Church and the movement of the Church since those years, that we have to be engaged and be in dialogue with the Church and, you know, with the various issues that we confront every day.
Since Vatican II, of course, each Pope brings their own flavour, their own giftings, as you were told in Timaru, to the Church, and perhaps none more so than the current Pope.
Yeah, I think they've all been incredible. You know, John the 23rd, who started the Second Vatican Council, the Cuban Missile Crisis was going on, and one of his most famous documents was called Peace on Earth. And then Paul VI on the development of peoples, his controversial one, Humane Vitae, but it was, you know, people focus it down to contraception, but it was actually much bigger on the meaning of human love. And you read it now and it's quite prophetic with what you're seeing happening in our world today. John Paul, who spoke so many of the issues of our time, Benedict and his short pontificate, but bringing us back to the basics of faith, hope and love. And Francis is, you know, putting our faith into action, and you know, and our dialogue with the environment, you know, and our common home, the earth, but also with people of different faiths.
Yeah, no, certainly some change happening, and also here in Aotearoa, a synod taking part at the moment, some important decisions being made. Can you talk to us, unpack that a little bit? What's happening in that space? Yeah,
there have always been synods and councils throughout the history of the Church. In the past, they generally just involved the bishops, and certainly out of the Second Vatican Council came the Synod of Bishops, but in more recent synods, lots and lots of lay people are involved. So I was in Rome 5 years ago for the Synod on young people. Lots of young people from around the world engaging with the bishops, and some great conversations. And Pope Francis is wanting the Church to be a more synodal church. That doesn't mean that we're a democracy, but it's rather a recognition of our baptismal call, that the Spirit works through each of us, and each of us is called to have that prophetic voice within the Church. And so the idea of synod in a New Zealand context would be hui. But we not only listen respectfully and spiritually with each other, but we're also listening to the movement of the Spirit, and the voice of the Spirit is who sets the direction out of our conversation. And so it's a wonderful process of discernment. So at the moment, the whole church around the world is engaged in this synodal process. So parishes here in Auckland Diocese have been meeting. We've had a diocesan gathering. Then we've had a New Zealand gathering. The next one is an Oceania gathering. That'll be in Fiji next year.
Yep.
And then in October next year and the year after, there will be a gathering in Rome. It's a new process for the church.
I mean, very difficult, given the size of the organisation, for everybody to have their say, but this is the body of Christ, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't think we've got it right yet, because I think a lot of people in this first round have just wanted to put out their opinion, and there it is. But that's not the point of it. It's actually having the discussion with each other, yes, putting out your opinion, but actually listening to where the Spirit is leading us all. And there are some who are afraid that this is going to change the doctrine of the Scriptures or the church, and that's not going to happen. You know, but it is that as the church moves forward, it has to reflect on its understanding of the Scriptures and the doctrine of the church. Not making it relevant for today, but discerning that way forward that is in accordance with the Scriptures and the tradition of the church.
Looking at some of the history of the church in Aotearoa specifically, and concerns about some of the things that the church got wrong, particularly in the area of Māori land rights and some abuse of minors. This, unfortunately, perhaps casts a shadow over the church's reputation in some people's eyes. Certainly a challenge as we move forward.
You know, in terms of Christianity arriving in New Zealand, the Catholic Church was quite late. So Marsden arrived in 1820, and Bishop Pompelia, the first Catholic bishop, he arrived in 1838. But Pompelia was quite different than a lot of the earlier missionaries, and his attitude towards land was that it was entrusted to us, and that once we had been finished using it, that it should be handed back. He understood that land was sacred to Māori, so it was quite a different and nuanced view in terms of that.
Not to say that they always got everything right, but perhaps had a more Te Ao Māori view of things in the first place.
Yeah, and certainly those French missionaries did. They weren't seen to be aligned with the crown, being French. But then as missionaries came from Ireland and the other priests from Ireland, they lost that sense and that connection with Māori, and it's something that we've always got to continue to engage with. The sexual abuse crisis, I mean, that's a massive one. And, for me, looking back at what has happened, I think the big question that the Royal Commission is not asking is, well, why did this happen? And I think a lot of it was in the past that young men would go to train to be as brothers or as priests in their high school years, and so they were removed from family, and it stunted their psychosexual development. I think that's one issue. I think another issue is that we didn't have a clear enough understanding of the human person in terms of sexuality and what people are attracted to, we know a lot more about paedophiles and ephebophiles. In the past, bishops sent people away to be treated, and the advice came back was, will they be cured now? But we know that's not the case. Within the church, we believe in forgiveness and redemption, and again, that was all part of the, if you like, problem. But I think the sexual attraction of paedophiles and ephebophiles don't change. It is fixed, and it can't be converted or cured. And we have to actually acknowledge that. And certainly now there's quite a lot of psychological screening, and we would be looking for any signs of that in the formation of priests. I think the other thing that I think is really important is, and I know that there are some survivors who will shoot me down for saying this because they think we're trying to minimise it, but in my dealing with survivors, they are always totally adamant that we have to do everything that we can to ensure that this doesn't happen to anybody, whether in the church or not. And you know, in New Zealand, 1 in 5 kids will be abused by the time they're 18.
Something we've seen, of course, from the Royal Commission. This is in no way restricted to the church, but perhaps through stereotypes, people think that this is something which the church has, if you like, got a monopoly on. Yeah,
well, it's yes, sadly, but it is such an important conversation that we have to have. And you know, if anything, that if I had the opportunity at the Royal Commission, and I appeared before the Royal Commission this week, but wasn't given the opportunity to say what was on my mind, that's what I want to say. We made some horrible mistakes. We didn't recognise abuse happening. When we didn't act on it, and we have to acknowledge that it's out there and that we have to be attentive to it. So.
For the role that you've stepped into, it is you know, a large area and a very large city, of course, the city of Auckland, big shoes to fill, as we say. What do you see to be some of the challenges ahead for you in your role as Bishop of Auckland?
The big challenge, I'd say, is that for so many people, faith has become irrelevant. We've got a spiritual crisis in our country and in a lot of other countries of the so-called Western or First World. So I think that's the big underlying thing. I think a lot of people will say, yes, spirituality, yes, but religion, no. But in the end, what happens is they just create God in their own image and likeness. And I think, you know, it's representing Christ today in a way that people can be captivated by him, just as the first disciples were captivated by him. And I think a wider vision is that we have to be able to do that as the one Christian voice. And I think, you know, the divisions amongst Christians don't help us proclaim in Christ. And I think that's a real challenge as well.
I know you're just new in the role as bishop, but many years from now, when you're handing the role to somebody else, what would you like your legacy to be? What would you like people to say of the outgoing Bishop of Auckland when that's you, Steve?
Please God, I'd like people to say, actually the spiritual life of the diocese has just grown. And that's what it's all about. It's about the relationship with Christ. And that's what I hope for anyone I pastor to, that they'll get to know and love Christ, and that as I try to share my faith with them, that they'll share with their faith with me, and that together we'll grow in that faith.
We certainly appreciate your time today. Some big challenges ahead for you personally and, of course, for the church in Aotearoa, but all the best with the mahi in that regard. We certainly appreciate your time. Thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Andrew.